People tend to think disappearances happen in moments of chaos, a storm, a fight, a decision made too quickly. That isn't how this one began. On the afternoon John Darwin disappeared, the sea near Hartlepool looked the way it always does to people who live there. Gray water, moving just enough to stay uncomfortable. Cold air that never quite leaves your hands. Nothing dramatic, nothing memorable. John didn't tell anyone he was going out. That matters more than it sounds. People who expect to come back usually say something, even if it's meaningless. John didn't. He loaded the canoe carefully, checked it, strapped it down, and drove to the coast without creating a single memory someone could replay later. If you look at that as panic, it doesn't make sense. But if you look at it as patience, everything does. When he reached the water, there was no audience, no one watching closely enough to remember his face. He pushed the canoe into the sea and paddled out alone. Not fast, not far. Just far enough that the houses behind him stopped looking like places and became shapes. Hours later, the canoe came back without him, not destroyed, not torn apart, just damaged enough. A crack along the side, scrape marks that looked accidental, the kind of damage that lets your mind finish the story for you without resistance. There was no body. In the North Sea, that isn't unusual. Search teams went out, helicopters flew low, boats moved in slow, overlapping lines across water that never holds still. But by the second day, the tone had already shifted. No one said it out loud. They didn't need to. Cold water shock, strong currents, low survival time. This is where the story should have ended. Most stories do. This one didn't. Weeks passed, then months. No body surfaced, no sightings. Eventually, paperwork replaced uncertainty. John Darwin was declared dead. No coffin, no remains, just a date on a form. At the funeral, people spoke about him in the past tense while he was still breathing somewhere nearby. Sympathy cards arrived. Neighbors lowered their voices around his wife, Anne Darwin. Their two sons sat through conversations they were too young to fully understand, struggling to process the loss of their father. That kind of grief is different. There's nothing to focus on, nothing to accept. Only the quiet weight of absence. After the funeral, the house felt wrong. His shoes were still there, his clothes, objects that suggested he might walk back in at any moment. One son reacted with quiet anger. The other withdrew, becoming careful, observant, as if the world had just taught him that people can disappear without warning. Anne watched this happen, and she didn't tell them the truth, because John Darwin wasn't dead. That same night, he came back to the house, not openly, not confidently. He came back like someone trespassing in his own life. He listened before he moved. He stayed out of sight. He slept during the day when street noise covered movement, and at night he stayed still. Sometimes he hid in a spare bedroom with the curtains drawn tight. Other times, when even that felt risky, he slept in the garden shed. The shed wasn't somewhere you lived. It was damp, cold, barely enough room to lie down properly. He learned how to sleep lightly, never deeply enough to lose awareness. Every car passing outside made his body tense. Every sound felt like it might be the one that exposed him. This wasn't freedom. It was survival measured in silence. Anne knew he was there. By day, she played the role everyone expected. Grieving widow, polite, quiet. She accepted sympathy and answered questions carefully. By night, she became practical. She watched the street. She learned patterns. She decided when John could move and when he had to stay frozen. They lived two lives under the same roof. While all of this was happening, someone else was paying for it without knowing why. Their sons cried in rooms John couldn't enter. They talked about him in the past tense while he listened from behind doors. They adjusted to life without a father, building routines around a loss that wasn't real. Days passed without incident, then weeks, then months. That's when the lie became normal. Fear didn't disappear, but it stopped being sharp. It became familiar. John learned the rhythm of the street better than he ever had before. Who left early, who came home late, when lights went out, when it was safe to breathe. Anne learned how to grieve convincingly without thinking about it. And then the money arrived. Life insurance, benefits, financial relief that hadn't existed before John died. More than £200,000 would eventually pass through their hands because he was legally dead. That was the moment the lie stopped being temporary. Once a deception improves your life, ending it feels irrational. At some point, John couldn't stay hidden in Hartlepool anymore. Too many risks, too many moments where something could slip. Using false documents, he left quietly and moved between places, staying off records where he could. England stopped feeling safe. Once the paperwork was signed, no one was really watching anymore. They needed distance that curiosity couldn't cross. They found it in Panama. In Panama, John walked outside during the day again. He stood in sunlight. He spoke to people who didn't know his face. They lived under new names, opened bank accounts, bought property, and built a life that looked ordinary. That ordinariness was the most dangerous part. Normal life leaves records. In 2007, Anne applied for residency. Someone did what people always do. They typed her name into a computer. A British news story appeared. A missing canoeist. A man presumed drowned. There was one question no one asked at the time. And once it surfaced, nothing else mattered. A photograph appeared online. John and Anne, together, alive. The lie collapsed quickly after that. John walked into a police station claiming amnesia. It didn't matter. Evidence doesn't forget. In court, the fraud was clear. But what mattered most wasn't the money, it was the children. The judge spoke about the years of grief they had lived through, about the damage done by making them mourn a father who was alive the entire time. John went to prison, and so did Anne as his accomplice. Their marriage didn't survive. Their sons were left with something worse than loss, the knowledge that their grief had been chosen for them. The sea never took John Darwin. It just gave him somewhere to hide long enough for everyone to stop looking. And that's the part that stays with you late at night. Not the fraud, not the sentence. The fact that while his children cried themselves to sleep, their father was close enough to hear them. Like and subscribe.